Richard, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you all.
One of the top topics for many people at the moment is immigration. And I wonder, can you give us a little bit of clarity on the Reform UK's position on immigration? What would you do about it?
Last Saturday, we launched this document, which is called Our Contract with You. It's available on our website, reformparty.uk, and it's a very detailed way of how we've got to reorganise the way we actually run and manage the whole country. Our view is we're heading towards an absolute catastrophe. The country's never been in such a bad state. The Tories have broken Britain. The threat of Starmageddon this year is a threat of bankruptcy over the coming years. And the situation's really serious. And within that, we set out everything. I'll refer to it throughout this interview. But on immigration, it's a very, very important position. Our view is absolutely clear. Smart immigration can be a very good thing for any country, but it's got to work for the existing population, the existing people, as well as work for the person coming into the host nation. And look, in a sense, we've been subjected to mass immigration, the complete betrayal of what was promised by the Tories. You've got a city the size of Birmingham arriving in 2022, 23, and probably in 24, give or take. What we should do is we should say one in, one out. So we can welcome high-skilled, high-quality people, average salary equal or above the average national wage. About 400,000 people, give or take, leave the UK every year. So we could welcome that sort of number measured over a 5-year electoral cycle, and that would be smart. Immigration only works when people actually can be absorbed, integrated, and welcomed into local communities, and they've got to speak the language. And actually, we know that multiculturalism has failed. We're seeing it, sadly, on our streets with these dreadful pro-Hamas marches at the moment. We may come back to that. People, if they want to live in a country, you've actually got to empathise with and respect the values of the host nation. In our case, the heritage and history of the United Kingdom, who we are, our values of tolerance, decency, respect, compassion, much of which is encapsulated. I know it's a bit quirky and a bit sort of old school British, but you know, there's that wonderful game of cricket that we invented. Is it in the spirit of fair play? That's the key thing. You can be competitive, you can have some banter, but is it in the spirit of fair play? And I think that actually is who we are.
Certainly, people are very concerned about this question of integration and whether or not we've allowed people in who perhaps are never going to integrate.
It's actually worse than that. We've actually allowed people to come in who, in a sense, not only do they not buy into and empathise with our heritage and history, but actually they're quite happy to actively work against it. And so within this document, for example, we're based on the Christian ethos. And of course, we can welcome people of no faith or other faiths. But fundamentally, we operate under the English legal system. And we say we actually now need to legislate, given what's going on, that Sharia law is banned to be operated or used in any forum in the United Kingdom. So that's where we are on lawful immigration. With regard to illegal immigration, primarily the boats, but not just the boats, we're very clear. We're the only party with a policy that will stop the boats.
And how will you do that specifically?
Well, we've got a 6-point plan, but the two simple key things is you've got to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. I'm not tolerating all this mamby-pamby nonsense from the lefty lawyers who say, oh, that means you're doing away with human rights. May I just remind everybody, Australia, Canada, America, other great nations outside the continent of Europe, they have human rights very successfully. They don't have to be a member of the ECHR. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you've got to pick up people safely out of the boats and take them back to France, which we're legally entitled to do under 2 international maritime treaties. I've read them. I know exactly the clauses, and no one can pick me up and dispute that. Why? Because they know I'm right, but they haven't got the guts to tell it as it is. I have. I know how to stop the boats. I will stop the boats. No one else will.
Personal taxes, which a lot of people care about because more and more people are being dragged into higher tax brackets, and economic growth. So specifically, what are the key policies that a Reform UK government would bring to those issues?
Well, the two key words you've just used there are economic growth. And we've got no growth. In fact, we're in recession as a nation. We've been in 7 quarters of recession on a per head basis because of the mass immigration that we are suffering. And I said in the beginning of January, you cannot grow an economy with the 5 burdens of record high taxes, record government spending, often wasteful, which is now it's about 45% of the size of the economy, with nanny state regulations, many of which drive us absolutely bonkers, and with mass low-skilled immigration. And then finally, the absolute insanity of net zero. And all the other parties, they're obsessed with this. You can't grow an economy with those burdens. We're in recession, and that's why I refer to the catastrophe that's looming, because we're probably going to, our deficit this year is going to be 120, 130 billion. That's about £2,500 per adult. £5,000 per household in 1 year. Basically, national debt added onto the debt of your house. What you've got to do, and it's all set out and costed in this document on the website. You've got to scrap net zero. That saves about 30 billion a year, cautiously. That is a prudent number, 30 billion. We've got to stop paying this voluntary interest on all the QE reserves that were printed, the money that was printed, that now goes back to the Bank of England by the commercial banks. We're now paying 35 billion a year this year, a voluntary transfer of taxpayers' cash to rich city institutions decided by the government of the Bank of England and his cronies. Yes, it protects the quangocracy of their mates and their non-exec directorships within the city. The reason the banks in the last 10 days have all announced record profits by their own admission is because of higher interest rates that they're benefiting from, because the Bank of England is paying base rate on the QE reserves. We don't need to. Economists agree with me. 2 former deputy governors of the Bank of England agree with me. Left-wing think tanks like the New Economics Foundation agree with me. Other central banks, the ECB, the Swiss Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, they're not doing it. We shouldn't. It's absolutely outrageous. Those 2 things alone is 65 billion quid. With that saving, we then say, right, we should have 0 income tax below £20,000. That frees up 7 million from paying any income tax whatsoever. That's a great thing to help make work pay, which helps people also move away from being trapped on out of work benefits. We should lift the medium-term tax threshold from £50,000 to £70,000 for the 40% rate. We should reduce stamp duty to 0 on homes below £750,000. And again, that will kickstart significant economic activity through what they call the multiplier effect. We've got to reduce the energy levies. We've got to scrap the tourist tax, and we've got to abolish the grief tax, the double taxation of IHT. All of those things are easily afforded by the 2 things I mentioned. And then the third big saving we do, if you save £5 in 100 in all government spending, like we're all doing at home or in our small businesses, that's another 50 billion quid. That's how you afford not only these personal tax cuts, which are really important, and then create economic activity, but also small businesses, reduce corporation tax back to 20%, and then with a clear mandate to go to 15%. You've got to lift VAT threshold to £120,000, and you've got to abolish the IR35 on small traders, small businesses. Those things will kickstart significant activity that will make a massive, massive difference to our economic growth. And here's the thing, most people forget, in the 80s and 90s, we would have growth of 2.5% to 3.5% a year. Now the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, they get excited if we get 0.25% or 0.5%. That's not growth, that's feeble.
Can we move on to something a little bit more general now, which is a value, really, of our society, which is freedom of expression? Can you please comment on what's going on at the moment with this whole Islamophobia debate, and also people being cancelled for the wrong opinions, whether in schools, universities, or in the workplace?
It's terrible, and I regret to say, whilst much of our document sets out what we can do in the first 100 days, what you've just referred to has become so pervasive and so terrifying, it'll take a lot longer than 100 days to sort out. But we have the courage to tackle some of these things. So, for example, the 2010 Equalities Act, you've got to scrap it. You can't reform it, scrap it. It's hopeless, it's appalling. You've got to scrap all the diversity, equality, and inclusion roles, all of the ESG stuff, all of this stuff has permeated a sense of fear across society. You can't reform it, you've got to start again. Scrap the whole lot of it. We're absolutely crystal clear on this point. We need essentially, I mean, I hate sort of more regulations and legislation, but we basically need a free speech bill, it seems, in order to deal with this. And on a lot of the stuff, the trans stuff, again, we've just got to say that, I mean, on trans specifically, for example, it's a breach of safeguarding. You've got to scrap it all in all our primary and secondary schools. Just ban it. Any head teacher or teacher that allows it, they're fired. Literally, you've got to stop this weekend. It's absolutely appalling. And, you know, we've got to make people have the confidence to be able to speak freely. It's really bad in the workplace. We absolutely appreciate that. And I think these are some of the things, but in a sense, I'm not saying that's going to solve it overnight. It's not. I'm afraid this is a real problem.
Richard Tice, leader of the Reform Party, that has been very interesting so far. I'm looking forward to talking to you in part 2, where we'll cover a number of other very important topics to the British people.
Thank you very much.